We're live, Chair.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Learning and Skills Scrutiny Committee, Friday, 13th of February. Welcome to every of the members, officers. A couple of substantive agenda items today. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair. We've got from committee, we've got apologies from councillors Aled Davis, Bryn Davis and Gareth Ratcliffe. From Cabinet, we've got apologies from Councillor Glyn Preston and Councillor Sandra Davis. And from officers, we've got apologies from the Chief Executive, Emma Palmer, Clive Pinney, Monitoring Officer, James Chappell, Jane Thomas, Mary Thomas, Nancy Owen.
Thank you. Any other apologies to add to that? If not, we'll move on. We are correct, and we move on to item 2 on your agenda, which is disclosures of interest. Not anticipating any, but judging on your silence, I'll move on to declarations of party whip. And similarly, not expecting any there, but if there are, please speak up. And that takes us to item 4 on the agenda, which is the performance standards and improvement in Powys schools. It's attached in your agenda pack, and it's to receive a report on primary KS4 and KS55 outcomes. Go over to Councillor James Gibson-Watt, who's the portfolio for education, who will give a quick introduction before we move on to officers to introduce this report. James.
Sorry, Chair, can I just raise one point first?
Go on to Gareth.
Yeah, in the summary page that we've got around this report, it mentions that this is about primary, secondary, special, but there's no mention of special schools in the actual report. I just wanted clarification on that.
Anybody quick comment on that in relation to Gareth's comments?
I don't know whether the director wants to come in, or do you want me to director? I'll leave the director to answer.
Thank you, James. Dr. Richard?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. So the data presented in the report, which is obviously Powys-wide data, includes learners in specialist provision where they have sat GCSEs or Key Stage 5 qualifications.
So does the attendance data include special schools then?
Sarah's nodding and Julia nodding.
Right. Okay. Because that's not explicit at all in the report.
Any further comment?
Just a quick point of clarification, if that's okay, Chair. Just
Yeah.
to say for attendance, it's looked at for the primary sector as a whole and the secondary sector as a whole, regardless of setting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Chair, would you like me to just a quick introduction? It's a very substantive report before you today. I doubt in my time as a councillor that I've seen as substantive a report on performance and standards in our schools. Other members may disagree, but I can't recall one being as detailed and as substantive. It gives the background to the situation in our learning system, and then goes on to the summary of outcomes and standards, and then goes into the detail of grades and the like. And I think from my perspective as portfolio holder, just at the comment before we go into questions and the detail, is what we see is a variable picture, some good and some much less good. Pleasing to see that our GCSE outcomes in our secondary schools has gone above the Welsh average this year, having been below in previous times. But very serious concerns around Key Stage 5 outcomes, the A-level BTEC outcomes in our schools. In terms of attendance, again, very variable across the county from school to school and from sector to sector. But generally speaking, above the Welsh average on the whole. But in terms of attainment, particular concern around underperform or underattainment for our ALN learners and those on free school meals. And I think this is something that, I'm sure the committee will wish to delve into further, of particular concern. And when we get to attendance and exclusions, very concerning are the proportion of those that are with additional learning needs, and free school meals are categorized as EFSM learners. So, there's plenty to get to teeth into here. But it's a mixed picture. But there are some good stuff. There's some good stuff in here, and we are making progress, I think. But there are areas of significant improvement needed across the system. So, thank you, Chair. Excuse me.
Thank you, Councillor James, for that brief introduction. Shall we move over to officers now to give us a brief introduction before we go to questions?
Yeah, thanks so much,
Thanks,
Chair.
Dr. Richard.
Thanks very much, and thanks to the portfolio holder as well. I'll just take colleagues through, if I could, the opening sections of the paper, and then we can have a discussion then around the more detailed data which is in the paper. I think it's important to state the purpose of the report. The purpose of the report is an evaluation of performance. It isn't an evaluation of input, but what the report does do is identify the next steps that the data is indicating that we need to take to address the gaps and the trends which the portfolio holder has referred to. But I'm sure during the course of the scrutiny session, what that input looks like, officers will be able to respond to and add some detail to. So just in terms of background, I think it's worth reminding ourselves and the public what data is actually available to us. So at Key Stage 3, we'll all be aware that there are no statutory national performance measures. So previous levels in primary schools are no longer in place. So the report for our evaluation of performance at Key Stage 3 relies on our school improvement advisor visits to school. So those first-hand visits where advisors look at learning, look at books, speak to learners, speak to staff to establish what the standard is in our schools across the authority. But apart from attendance and exclusions data, nationally, we don't have those standardized levels across our schools anymore. At Key Stage 4, nationally, we continue to publish GCSE outcomes, and we've got strong comparators through the All Wales core data sets. And you'll see that we reference those throughout the Key Stage 4 section of the report, also drawing on literacy, numeracy, and science scores. So where possible in the detail of the report there, we reference 3-year trends and national benchmarking when that data is available. At Key Stage 5, we also have national reporting to benchmark ourselves against, and we've done that in terms of A-level and vocational outcomes. We've also introduced into the paper the ALPS analysis, which Chris James will be able to speak to in more detail later, which gives us an indication of whether our schools are adding value to the learners that start qualifications at 16. In addition to that exam data at Key Stage 5, we've also used post-16's destination data and again, attendance statistics for post-16 learners. So just setting there some of the background and what information is available to us to be able to put forward in this report. And I'm sure colleagues in the meeting will also have requests for other sets of information, which of course we can consider bringing into future papers. So just to move on to the summary of outcomes and standards, and I do appreciate that the second half of the paper puts a lot of data in front of people. So in section 3 of the report, there is a high-level summary in much the way that the portfolio holder has been able to articulate of the current position. So if I start at GCSE in 3.1 of the report, you'll note that overall our A star to C in Powys, A star to C exam result percentage in Powys, is improving and is above national average. But there's always a however, and the however is that there is variation between our schools across the authority in terms of A star to C, and there's also variation between our groups of learners. And you'll see that this report makes reference to groups of learners, whether that be boys or girls, or learners entitled to free school meals as opposed to those that aren't. So what we can see in our overall analysis of the A star to C position in Powys is that while the percentage of A star to C grades is increasing, it's not increasing for those groups of learners entitled to free school meals. So what we're doing, it's having improvement across the system, but not for those most vulnerable learners. Other data we have at Key Stage 4 is around literacy, numeracy, and science scores. And again, it's a broadly positive trajectory. However, there is variation between boys and girls. They're not achieving equally. And also variation between children entitled to free school meals and their peers. So again, you see, while there's some system-wide improvement, the work that we are doing is not sufficiently reaching those most vulnerable groups. Key Stage 5, the picture is bleaker. So all indicators at Key Stage 5, now that will be learners who get A star and A star to C, A star to E. All of our Powys indicators are below national averages. That's a really significant observation that this paper makes, that at each indicator at post-16, we are in decline in Powys. Hence the need for that immediate intervention which the service is putting in place, but also the longer term transformation of the post-16 landscape in Powys. So children at post-16, the ALPS data is telling us, is not making the progress that they should, considering the grades that they are achieving at GCSE. So we have learners coming in at post-16 who may have had A's, B's, C's at GCSE, which should be setting them up for the highest level grades at A level, but they are not getting those grades. So something is going wrong when we have a high achieving learner coming in at 16, but losing the value that our post-16 education should add. When we come to primary, we work backwards down through the 3 to 16 continuum. You'll note in the paper that our school improvement advisors have made some key observations around standards. Very broadly at primary school, at primary level, we see improvement across the system. And that's actually reflected as well in the relatively strong and changing inspection profile for our primary schools. The last part of the paper notes the 8+ positive primary inspections that we've had in Powys since September. So most of our learners at primary are making steady progress and develop secure skills, and I'm being cautious in the language I'm using because again there is an absence of national data, but develop secure skills in reading, writing, numeracy and digital competence. Again, just to remind colleagues, those judgments are arrived at as a result of our school improvement interaction with schools and seeing evidence firsthand. However, again, there's always a however, what we see across the system is a variation in the depth of learning across our primary schools and a variation in the independence of our learners across our primary schools. Now, I suspect further on in the discussion, we'll start to unpick why that is and I know colleagues will be able to speak about Curriculum for Wales, the opportunities it presents, but equally some of the challenges as we've lost those standardized frameworks nationally and then, of course, within our local authority. But the picture at primary, it is more stable than our secondary picture. And then if we work further backwards to our early years setting, it's a real strength of our authority. Again, not relying entirely on external audits through the inspectorate, but it is worth noting 10 positive primary inspections in our early years settings. And our early years colleagues also report strong progress and evaluation at that early years level. So although I've taken you through that in reverse order, if I was to flip it, you'll see real strength in that foundation at early years, that strength feeding through to primary through transition arrangements and the sharing of expertise. A broadly strong picture across primary, but then it starts to fragment at secondary school until it is fractured at post-16. Chair, before I move into the attendance section of the report, shall I pause there? How would you like to take this paper in two halves, or shall I continue with the attendance and exclusions?
Yeah, no, I think that's a reasonable suggestion there, because obviously there is an awful lot of data and there's an awful lot to discuss. I'd also add to this now, and I have to apologise. I was absent in our pre-meet where we've come up with, well, my colleagues have come up with a rape of questions which I've just read this morning, and they've been answered quite substantial. I'd like that shared with the committee, but there's obviously a lot of information in here which we need to become a part of this meeting. So I think we as members in this meeting need to discuss how we share this information into our meeting, or do we publish the document? Because I think there's some really good answers and there's some real probing questions which we won't all have to be asked today. So Kath, if you could share that with all committee members, but obviously it's a short time scale due to the time of our pre-meet, but obviously it's been comprehensively answered, and it'll pick up a lot of the questions which we'd like to ask today. And I'm keen that this becomes part of publishing, really, so that these answers and questions are seen, really, so that it shows that we're doing really good scrutiny. I'll leave you to pause on that, and if Kath shares that with the rest of the committee today.
Chair, I can share after the meeting, but obviously the questions would need to be asked in the meeting.
Yeah, well, okay, but that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
And I was quite surprised that when I read the questions, how many questions that my colleagues had developed, really. And it's a shame that some of these questions will go by the wayside and some of the answers go by the wayside. So I really don't know. It's the first time that I've had this predicament, in my opinion. So just if it's just for members to consider that when they're asking questions today.
And Chair, I think you've got your paper in front of your camera.
Oh, apologies. What have I done?
Chair, could I just make a comment on the sheet that you're referring to? Just to note, officers have worked hard to answer it. We have indicated on the sheet where we think that some of the questions could be answered to greater depth in future papers that we bring forward as part of the Forward Work Programme. That's the first point I wanted to make. And the second is there is a request for quite a lot of additional data. Obviously, we receive the request 48 hours in advance of the meeting. So we will provide what we can at speed. It's not that we don't have the data, but clearly it needs to be formatted, cleansed, and put forward through to the scrutiny committee. So that will follow. Diolch yn fawr.
Okay. Does everybody understand the comments in relation to that anyway? But we'll try and get as many of them questions out today as we possibly can. Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And can I thank Richard and James for the introduction? I think the reason why we got so many questions, and I sat and read the report last night, the first report, and I've written down 53 separate questions. And to me, that should not be the case. A report should be coming to scrutiny where we've only got a few questions. In my view, this report is data rich, but evaluation light. It doesn't say why, doesn't give us a reason. And the first question I'm going to ask Dr. Richard is, why do you think we've got really high standards in the earlier settings, and that doesn't follow through to the end of key stage, let's say key stage 4? And you at the start of your presentation, Dr. Richard, you said that there's no data at primary, but in my view, that's wrong. I'm sure there's data coming through from primary schools and each individual learners, and I know that schools are then doing tests at key stage 3 to actually predict outcomes at the end of key stage 4, but that's not evidence in the report. You've given us the answers on the data, but you haven't actually said there's no targets mentioned within the data. There's no targets mentioned in your next steps. I just think it's, I mark exam paper for SIPFA. This paper, in my view, would not get a very high mark if I was marking it.
Okay, right. Let me come back to that then. First of all, I suppose the point around the 51 questions, there is, the polite response is, it is about, are they the right 51 questions for this paper? And I did make the observation at the start, this isn't about input. This is a performance paper to provide a high-level summary to equip the scrutiny committee with the information they need to decide where the areas of focus are. But like we said, we're working through the questions that have come through. In terms of the point around targets that you make, Councillor Gareth, the targets for the service are in the Corporate and Strategic Equality Plan. They've really clearly published. They're reported on quarterly, and they're publicly reported on quarterly. And in that plan, we have targets which respond to each of the areas for development that the paper identifies. So there's targets around Key Stage 5, GCSE, there's targets around attendance and exclusions. But what we could do in future papers is just draw those targets from the CSEP into a final section of this paper so colleagues don't have to flip between two documents. So I think that would probably address the point that you make around targets. The question around, why does the system decline? It's an enormous question, isn't it? It's a huge question. Why does the system decline? If I was to try to give a straightforward, I can see other colleagues have got their hand up, but if I was trying to give a straightforward response to that, I think that as a system, we haven't been flexible enough and responsive enough to the changing needs of children as they progress through the school system. And I think this is a system-wide comment on the strength of leadership. It's a system-wide comment on our ability at a system level and school level to evaluate what we are doing and to make sure that we are targeting resources and focus into the areas which will have the maximum impact on learners. And I think as we progress through the system, that challenge of evaluation from a good sound database in order to identify areas for development, I think we lose some strength in that. So fundamentally, as we work through the system, I think we lose sight of, with real precision, what it is that we need to be concentrating on. I think that Curriculum for Wales, with its purposes, while the purposes are ambitious, we are relatively new as a system into the development of new curriculums, how we assess learners, and how we build knowledge and how we build skills. So I think nationally, as well as locally, we need far further focus on knowledge acquisition and the building of learners' skills in our schools so they can fundamentally access learning. Hence why this week, the Inspectorate and Welsh Government have come out to state that reading is a national focus, as it is here for us in Powys, and will be the focus of our school improvement visits later on this term. I think there's also an important point about pathways. Our learners come through the system, and the further through the system they come, their pathways narrow, and it shouldn't be like that. The curriculum starts to shrink in our schools at Key Stage 4, and for the reasons we know, it starts to shrink at Key Stage 5. So whereas learners should be able to expand out into the futures they choose, I think there are system restraints, which means those pathways aren't clear. And then potentially you have learners studying subjects that they don't want to study, or following pathways which are quite simply not firing them up to hold really high expectations for themselves and their futures. There are 100 other reasons why we see this decline in the system, but what I've tried to do there, I think, is just pick out what would be overall trends that we don't just see in Powys, but we see nationally as well. I can see Chair Eirig has got his hand up. Councillor Gareth had a question about primary data.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Richard. Eirig.
Yeah, just to come in on the point of the data in primary schools. We don't have any national data that is taken consistently across all schools now. All schools may use, the national numeracy and literacy tests. However, those are now diagnostic tests and aren't meant to be used to actually scrutinise schools, or for schools to then use that across the whole of the authority. So we couldn't use those, because they can use them twice during the year, and they can use them at any times they wish. So you're not comparing like on like across all the schools. Now that data is actually held at a school level, not at a local authority level, because it's meant to be used in that diagnostic way to show where pupils are, and also then where they need to develop next. So although there is data there, it is not data which we as a local authority can use to come to a decisive conclusion solely based on data. And that is why our work now with our school improvement team is looking at first-hand evidence inside schools. So actually getting in there and doing the monitoring alongside our schools, alongside our senior leaders, including governors in our monitoring as well, to actually see what standards are actually like in literacy, numeracy and digital in the classrooms themselves. And that is much better and effective use of our time, and also very clear then in agreement in what standards are like inside our schools. So that's why we haven't included the national test data in here, because that is solely for the schools and diagnostic in that way. So I hope that explains that.
Yeah, Eirig. Gareth, there's some comprehensive detail to your question there.
Yeah,
do you want to come back on that at all?
Yeah, sorry, Gwyn, but can we have Sally before I come back?
Yeah, of course. Go on, Sally.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to outline the challenge to our primary schools and to us as a local authority in gathering accurate assessment data and tracking the progress of learners effectively in the absence of any national standard or benchmarking. Levels have gone. The literacy and numeracy framework that used to be statutory is no longer statutory. So schools, to be fair to them, are scrabbling around to find ways to record the progress that their learners are making and track the progress their learners are making. And they're buying in a range of different packages to facilitate that. They're developing their own resources in the absence of a national standard set by the Welsh Government. And it's been a topic of great debate in social media since the advent of Curriculum for Wales. And we're no closer to getting that certainty of data that we're looking for. As an authority, that makes our position extremely difficult when we work with our schools around identifying a standardised benchmark to compare schools one with the other, which is why the increase on first-hand evidence and actually being in classrooms alongside teachers and head teachers, discussing standards, looking at learner work, listening to learners and understanding the progress they're making at a first-hand level is really the only option available to us in the current data ecosystem that we have for primary.
Thanks, Sally.
Yeah,
Come on, Gareth.
can I ask one question then? That's primary, that's fine, I understand that. But what assessment do secondary schools do in year 7 so they can actually track the individual children's performance through to the end of GCSE? Because I'm sure they're doing some tracking, they're doing some modelling, they know which students are going to be their star pupils at year 7, they know which ones are going to have to put extra support in. And how do we use that data then to actually improve our results 5 years later?
Chair.
Come on, Sally.
Thank you. Councillor Garrett's referring to CATS data, cognitive assessment tests, that some schools use to indicate future performance, but that is not a nationally verified or accepted method of data capture. So it's part of that suite of data capturing strategies that schools are trying to use to give themselves some certainty, but that isn't something that we can certainly rely on as local authorities, share publicly or verify in any way.
Can I just add to that as well? The CATS data is actually, again, school level data, not local authority data. We do not have access to that. So when we're going in as our school improvement advisors, we are working with our schools. They are then sharing the schools with the school improvement advisor, who is able then to challenge that at that level, at a school level, to see whether that is accurate. And then by using our monitoring alongside them there, we can see whether the schools are actually accurate in their assessment and how they are taking that forward.
Okay,
So, could I add could I add a short comment to that? So, that point that Sally and Eirig has just made speaks to the point that we are making repeatedly about the need for top quality school improvement advisors. Hence why we've put a new professional learning offer in place for our school improvement advisors. We've got new processes for quality assurance to ensure that there is the right level of quality in the reports that are coming from our schools. We're pairing with other authorities and partners to also peer assess the work that we are doing, because fundamentally, those assessments of the school improvement advisor at school level from first-hand evidence is what is giving us our intelligence system-wide.
So just to follow on from that then, Dr. Richards, so what targets have we got as an authority for this year's, so June 26, June 27, June 28 GCSE results? And what they're based and what are they based on?
Okay, so Councillor Gareth, thanks so much. What I will do, I'll just ask an officer to go into the CSEP to take a cut of the CSEP and paste it into the chat. But in answer to the second part of your question, what are they based on? So they are not just targets we're setting from ourselves from within Powys. They are targets based on national benchmarking and where we would expect to see ourselves against national benchmark data. And we use that benchmarking for GCSE targets, attendance targets, etc. So we're not just setting our own targets and marking our own homework. But if I will ask an officer to put that into the chat, there'll be quite a list.
Okay, thank you. But in my mind, what you've just said should have been in the body of this paper, so we know where the targets are, etc. And I understand what you're saying about the council's targets, but
and I responded to that at the start. In future papers, we can simply take a cut and snip from the corporate and strategic equality plan and insert the measures here to to save people having to go between two documents. Point taken. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Gareth. We move on to Councillor Angela.
Thank you, Chair. I sort of struggled to take all that in then. It took me back to being at school and sitting in the class with the teacher talking and me struggling to pay attention. So that's a me problem, I recognise that. But thank you for that sort of in-depth report there. I just can't help thinking that if we were doing an end-of-year school report for Powys School Service, we'd be saying should try harder. So I've got some questions to come back to the report, which highlights that there's mixed performance and significant variation across our schools. You've pointed that out, Dr. Richard. So I want to know what specific actions are being taken to address inconsistencies between the schools. It shouldn't matter where you live, the quality of your education. We should all be having a good quality education. And how will you evidence that the variability, is reducing year on year, as it doesn't seem to be at the moment? The report also says there are 6 schools below their family averages for free school meals attainment. So what targeted interventions are in place for these schools, and how will that impact be monitored? Are we sure we're doing the right things to help in our schools? Because it feels like we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or 3 steps back sometimes. And you also note that non-free school meals learners' performance has declined over several years. So what changes in teaching or curriculum or assessment practice can explain this decline, and how are we responding? What are we doing about it? So I want the more practical than the strategic answers. What are we actually doing in our schools to support our schools to ensure that our learners get the best quality education that they should be able to have? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Angela. Go on, Richard.
Yeah, go on. I'll come back in on that. I will say, I don't think to suggest 1 step forward, 3 steps back is accurate. And I think the data that's being presented in that paper shows that. The reality of system-wide improvement is it takes time, but there is a relentless focus on the right areas, which we now know because as a service, we're making better use of data in a way that we have never done historically, so we can be precise about what we do. Councillor Angela, I know you want the detail of exactly what we're doing in specific schools, but I do first just need to set out what allows us to make sure we're doing the right things. And that is, we've worked with every school across the authority to strengthen their self-evaluation processes, to ensure that what the school is identifying as their areas for development are the right ones. And that's fundamental, because if we don't do that, we're not putting resource into the right areas. And as an authority, we've got a history of not putting resource into the right areas, that scattergun approach I've spoken about before. So all schools have evaluated. The local authority has been involved in that evaluation, and we have, with schools, worked on schools' development plans. So schools and school leaders, our governing bodies, are focusing on the right thing. We now have a support offer brokered by our school improvement advisor that directly responds to the areas of development in that particular school. It's not a blanket approach. It's actually very tailored to the individual school. Now, I'm going to turn to Sally or Eirig to potentially, we won't name the school, but if we think of a school that we're working with, then we can give some specific examples of teaching and learning intervention, potentially how we're strengthening pedagogy, teaching in classrooms, strengthening the curriculum as an example. Sarah, you may want to consider, when Sally or Eirig are speaking, how you could demonstrate that same sort of bespoke intervention in terms of attendance and exclusions.
Okay, come on in, Sally or Eirig.
Chair, would you mind if I come in first, please?
Go on.
Because I think it has to be clear. Actually, the EFSM performance last year improved. We are 10.9% above where we were the previous year. We are 13.9 points higher than the national average. So what we couldn't say is actually the impact that we have had with our approaches that we've been doing has had an impact. However, it hasn't narrowed the gap between EFSM learners and non-EFSM learners. So we have to look at how can we narrow that gap by improving EFSM. What we actually see is that there's an improvement in non-EFSM learners as well. So it might be that the processes that we put in, the strategies that we put in there, is actually benefiting all learners rather than just those specific ones. Now, one of the approaches we've introduced over the last few years is the RADI principles. And we ask schools to focus on this. And this is about ensuring that right the way through all of their priorities, they consider how that will impact on those pupils that are vulnerable. So whichever element they are trying to, there is a specific aspect that they will look at and focus on to ensure that that is improving the outcomes for those EFSM learners. So there is an improvement from previous years. However, there is still improvements to go, because when you look across Wales, our percentage of improvement is not as strong as perhaps other places as well. So we can improve further, but there has been an improvement.
If I could just come back, Chair. So take on board, Eirig, what you've said there about improvements in EFSM learners, although there are those 6 schools that sit below their average, but the non-free school meal learners' performance has declined. So that's how you close in the gap, is it bring everybody down?
No, and that's what we can't do. It shouldn't be about the gap narrowing because one group is low, and that's what we've got to be doing. And that I take your point on there. It's not about that's not the way you lower the gap. You've got to improve those, but also improving the non-EFSM ones as well. So, Councillor Andrew, I take that point completely. And yes, that's what we want to do. Now, the way we can do that is improving our teaching and learning inside our schools. And that may be what Sally's going to come in and talk about next. I don't know what the answer's going to be. But if I was to continue, it would be, we have got to improve that teaching and learning. We've got to improve the offer. We have to ensure that those pupils get the right offers for them. So that's having the right choices when they get into GCSE level that they can take on, that they're interested in. Because we know in terms of any types of learning, if you're interested in what you're doing, that is what is going to help you and enthuse you for learning. So we want to get that right so we can take that forward. But then make sure the teaching is of a high standard. We've got to have high expectations of all of our learners as well. And I think that's so important that we are pushing and striving forward with that in Powys. There is some work that's happened and is having some impact, but we recognise that it's not enough. It's too variable, and we have to ensure that that improves.
Yeah, Eirig. Let's go straight over to Sally.
Just to reiterate really what Eirig has said about improving standards in teaching and learning, we are, with the support of the advisory team, holding schools to far better account for the standards in their schools, because it is their delegated responsibility to see that those standards are adhered to, met, exceeded, and our school improvement advisors have the role of bringing that challenge where that challenge is needed and bringing that support where that is needed. Standards in literacy and numeracy in particular are a focus of the work of our school improvement advisors. And thinking of examples from some of our secondary schools, I would certainly say that a big push in the last 6 months has been on the focused work with middle leaders, particularly leaders of skills, to be held to account for the progress their learners are making. We've talked about the difficulties in the data ecosystem in its current state. And our middle leaders in secondary schools, when they are tracking the progress of learners in years 7, 8 and 9, before we get to those GCSE and A-level outcomes, they need to have robust tracking and monitoring of formative assessment and summative assessment that is school designed and school level, so that they can feel confident that learners are making progress from their starting points, whatever those starting points have to be. And tracking the groups of learners, whether those are learners with EFSM, learners with ALN, boys, girls, but understanding the progress of groups of learners is a fundamental role that middle leaders have in schools, and they haven't, up until now, been exercising that responsibility effectively enough. And the school improvement advisors who work in my team are working very hard with our secondary schools to support the senior leaders in those schools to hold those middle leaders to account. That's been a very big change in the last year, and many middle leaders across Powys secondary schools would certainly say that that pressure has increased on them, I would say, in the last 6 months.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you there, Angela. Are you content?
Well, I mean, the phrase holding schools to account, isn't that what we've always been doing or should have been doing? So I just wonder, do you think we weren't doing that very effectively in the past? Obviously, if we can do that better, that's good. But we've had challenge advisors forever. They've had different names over the years, and that's been partially their role, and to work with governors in that role.
As I've said,
I just feel that we've said all this before. That's the problem I have with it all. We say this all before. We have to work with our schools. We have to support our schools. We have to challenge our schools. But what have we been doing up to now? So I just really want that reassurance that we're going to do something more robust, that it's actually going to mean something. It's going to improve something. At the end of the day, it is about those pupils. We can talk about strategy and data and all the rest, but this is pupil outcomes. It's their futures, isn't it?
I couldn't agree with you more, Councillor Angela. Can I come in there, Chair, please?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So when you talk about what is different, why now? We've had challenge advisors in the past. We've got school improvement advisors, we call them now, and a learning and improvement team who are working together, pairing up professional learning and school improvement, as I've said before in these scrutiny meetings, to raise standards in our schools. I want to offer you that reassurance, Councillor Angela, that I've never sat in front of you before and said that to you before. I am saying that to you now. We are working differently as a learning and improvement team. We have strengthened our school improvement advisory aspect of that team. We've got a strong, experienced range of head teachers who understand particularly secondary school performance, because we know that's where the lack of stability is. So we are working with experienced head teachers to support our head teachers to be the best that they can be, exactly as you say, to put those learners first, to give them the experiences that they deserve, so that every learner in Powys is given the opportunity to succeed to the best of their ability. And that's certainly my mission, Councillor Angela, and what gets me up in the morning. We're not there yet. We are a long way off the ideal solution, and I have every intention of seeing these outcome measure reports improve year on year over the next series of years, as we prove to you as a scrutiny committee that the changes we are introducing are making a difference. But I cannot conjure those outcomes for you at this present moment in time, but I can tell you what we are doing to try and achieve that aim.
Thank you,
Sally.
Chair.
Yeah,
Chair.
thanks for that assurance. I want to move on, but just before we do, Sally, you mentioned there about the challenge to middle leaders. I just wonder, do you feel that we've got enough leadership capacity within our middle leaders? Because very often they're just one-man bands.
That's a really good point, Chair. With the recruitment and retention issues we often face in Powys, we sometimes struggle to appoint to those middle leader roles, particularly in targeted subjects like maths and science, where we know there's a national shortage of middle leaders, particularly again in the Welsh medium sector. So that is a very real and present challenge, and our senior leaders are forced into situations of having to be extremely creative with the budgets they have, with the capacity they have, and the expertise they have in their middle leaders to make sure that the right people are in the right seats on the bus, driving that bus forward. But it is a huge challenge for our schools and a huge challenge nationally, Councillor Gwynfor.
Thanks, Sally. That's recognition of that reassures me a little bit. So great. So James and Richard are coming in here. So I'll go to James first.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, we're having a discussion here about this, the support that's coming from the authority to the schools, and particularly around the school improvement advisors. And I, as members may know, I am currently conducting a series of visits to secondary settings at the moment. And I can report, and I'm happy to do so in public, that the message I'm getting from school leaders is that they are, for perhaps particularly in the secondary sector, for the first time for some time, very pleased with the support they are now receiving from the SIAs, and are very pleased with the quality of the school improvement advisors that are now coming to support them in their schools. I think it's fair to report, and I have to give the director credit for this, great credit, is that, you know, he has sourced and got support from, you know, some very high quality individuals who are coming to support the county at the moment, and our schools. And I think that's going to produce good outcomes. And it is very pleasing to hear senior leaders in our secondary sector saying that they do appreciate the support that the local authority is providing now, because that hasn't always been the case in the past, as I'm sure you will recall. So I think I can report from my perspective as portfolio holder that I am very satisfied that the SIA system now is in much better shape than it was. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Richard.
Yeah, thanks so much. Just say thank you to the portfolio holder for thanking me there. But Sally's network of connections across Wales is unlike anybody else. And one of the really powerful things that Sally's leading to change how we operate in Powys is bringing people into the authority from outside and giving people within the authority the opportunity to see what good looks like outside of Powys. And that's a fundamental shift. If I could make two quick points. The first point around that assurance that, you know, we want to give the committee and Councillor Ange to you, because you raised the question, you know, might it be a consideration that we bring forward a paper? It doesn't need to be onerous, but it could simply articulate what our school improvement function for one particular school looked like before and what it looks like now. We could focus on one school. We could set it out really clearly what has changed. And, you know, with the chair's permission, you could potentially invite the head teacher of that school into this forum as well, so they can speak from their experience. So then you're getting your assurance, not just on paper, but actually from a school leader as well. So I'll just put that there for consideration. And the second point I'd like to make is, we're talking about challenge to schools in this conversation in the context of school improvement, although we're speaking about it in fairly narrow terms, in as much as we're just talking about the role of the SIA. What is happening in our authority is we're improving functions across the board. And that is bringing better support and challenge to our schools. So the system is bringing better challenge. An example would be around school site property. An example would be around the way our finance teams are working with schools, how we're using better data. So there is a point to make here that this is not just the business of the school improvement, learning and improvement team. It's the business of the council. A demonstration of that would be in the head teacher conference last week. It was last week, sorry, time is going so fast. Last week's head teacher conference, where we had heads in the chamber of the council for a great professional learning session. The CEO and the corporate directors joined the conference for the day, where they spoke about their responsibility for within their particular service areas for the improvement of education in Powys. So it is wider, the challenge and support is wider than just the SIA. And that's an important point to make. It can't all hinge on these individuals. It's got to be about system improvement. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves back in this yo-yo pattern that we're all too familiar with. Diolch, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. And I think there's a fantastic suggestion in relation to creating a document that shows where improvement has happened or change has happened in the school. That's the evidence which we've been searching for. So without going to my committee, yes, we'd love to be a part of that. Councillor Lucy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's more of a comment in a way, just that the report, it contains a huge amount of data, and it is good to see, although we would like to see more analysis, it's great to see that there is so much information being collected. So that is positive. But there doesn't appear to be any analysis comparing Welsh medium and English medium outcomes at any stage of education, with virtually no reference to Welsh medium outcomes at all in the report. And also a look at the outcomes for people who transfer from Welsh medium primary into English medium secondary, and whether that has an impact. And the outcomes for people who enter Welsh medium through the Trochi immersion scheme. Again, how does that impact on their education as they move through the system?
Thanks, Lucy. Who's picking up on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to come back in on that. I think those questions are absolutely right. I think as a service, we need to bring a separate paper to you which responds to each of Councillor Lucy's questions. I think they're really valid. It's sort of questions that will drive our improvement. The one thing I will say is that the outcomes of Welsh medium learners are included in the overall analysis. So they're not excluded, but they are not disaggregated to the level clearly that the scrutiny committee want.
Okay.
Chair, do you mind if I just come in on that one as well?
Go on
Because
then,
obviously,
Yeah.
being part of the team that have collected this information, it's recorded as literacy, so that includes whether it's Welsh or English. So whenever you're reading through there, the analysis is about Welsh and English included in that. But as Dr. Richard said there is an opportunity now for us to bring forward more information and disaggregate that. When we receive it from Welsh Government, it's very much in case of these are the literacy, because it looks at their highest grade in either Welsh or English. So we would need to look at a more granular level for that. But just to explain, when we're talking about literacy there, we are including both Welsh and English.
I think it would be interesting and helpful to see how, if there is variation between the two, though, particularly as we know that it can be very difficult in some subjects to get the right teaching staff for Welsh medium.
Okay, yeah, no, I think that's accepted there, Lucy. Councillor Clare.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say I was very pleased to hear Dr. Richards say that we're moving towards a system-wide data-driven approach that's tailored to the individual schools and areas rather than a blanket approach. I'm really pleased to hear that. Can I just make an appeal on the data? I appreciate what Dr. Richards said about this being a high-level overview and that there'd be more detail presented in different papers for different topics. But where that data is presented in this paper, I'm very concerned to see it's not being consistently applied. So, for example, we've talked a lot about GCSEs improving nationally, but there's no comparative figures with other LEAs in the report. Conversely, we've got tables for post-16 comparisons nationally, and yet again inconsistency in how that data is presented. So in table 5.1.7 on page 21, it includes the 24 to 25 data, but only has 20 of the 22 local authority areas in it. And conversely, in table 5.1.12 on page 22, it doesn't include the 24 to 25 data, but has 22 LEAs. So as an appeal for me, really, is when data is being presented, it's presented consistently. Because otherwise there's a tendency to think, well, why is that data being shown that way and that data being shown in a different way? So I'm very pleased to know that we're following the data and the evidence in making any further system-wide improvements, but just an appeal really for that data where it is presented to be presented consistently, so that a proper and fair comparison can be made. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Councillor Clare. I can see Chris has got his hand up. I think take your comments on board. I think there's a point for us to note around how perhaps we really make clear some of the tables. So, for example, where you referred to Key Stage 5 there, I'll just explain that. So if you look at in the paper point 5.1.6, It states out of the 20 local authorities who deliver sixth form provision in Wales. Hence why the table contains 20 local authorities, because it's referring to authorities who deliver sixth form provision in Wales. And then if you go over the page, so the following table includes, as noted in 5.1.11, authorities that also have colleges delivering provision and no sixth form provision. So within that second list, you've got all 22 local authorities, but Merthyr Tydfil and Blaen y Gwent don't have sixth forms. But, point being, if that needs greater clarity, we'll think about how we really set things out, which we're very familiar with, which perhaps the committee might not be. But thank you for your comments around the data.
So if I can come back quickly on that point, I actually did understand why Merthyr and Blaen y Gwent were missing. But again, it's more the point that, again, going towards this data and evidence locally, we have in this part of the world, pupils come from Merthyr and Blaen y Gwent because they don't have local authority run sixth forms in those constituency areas. So again, it's just about having all that evidence presented consistently so that we can form our views from that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I can see Chair Chris has got his hand up.
Go on, Chris.
Diolch, Richard. I think you've actually covered off the main points there, and Councillor Clare, I do take your point, and we are working with the data which is provided nationally, which is MEDA and the All Wales Core Dataset data, and there is a difference in the way some of that data is collated in terms of is it the data from the learner's home postcode, is it the data of the centre where the tests were taken? So that is something which we'll feed back to MEDA.
Happy with that, thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Councillor Sue. You with us, Sue? Your microphone. Not picking up Sue there. Okay, Councillor Sue, we'll come back to you. We'll go to Councillor Angela.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chair, to be the naysayer, but I just feel that we've been here before. I'm really sorry, Dr. Richard, but I hear that you want to improve things, and I believe that. I believe wholeheartedly in all of you, your passion and your dedication to your role. I'm just not hearing anything that's going to be different, to do anything different. And to me, we're doing a lot of talking here, but surely it boils down to three very simple things. Attendance. Our pupils have to be in school if they're going to learn. And then engagement, that really positive relationship and delivery between the school, between the pupil, between the family, between the local authority, and then the quality of teaching and learning. And I just don't think we've got the building blocks right, that we're continuing twiddling around the edges but not actually delivering. Our early years are doing really well. We've had an excellent report in early years, so why is that not following through? And in attendance, we got such variation, haven't we? So none of our, in secondary, I've just got some notes, I'm checking my notes, it's a huge wide range of attendance in different schools. So what's working in one school and not in another? And we're hearing that in high schools, our girls' attendance is lower than our boys, and yet girls are outperforming boys. It doesn't make sense, does it? And I'm just really frustrated. I'm sorry, I am just really frustrated that I just don't think I'm hearing anything new. Sorry, Chair.
Yes, it's okay. You're entitled to your opinion. It's noted.
Chair, I'm happy to come back and comment. I think.
Yeah.
I think then it's about what we bring forward to this committee to demonstrate the new in the way that I said around a particular school case study as an example, because I'm 100% confident you would then see the new. I think we also see the new in the change in ESTIN inspection profile. Our inspection profile as a result of new systems and processes is improving. And that's fact. And that's not my fact. That's a fact from our external auditor. And I say that caveated by the fact This is not about Estyn. This is about us understanding our schools better, using data better in the way that we are, and getting ahead of the inspectorate so that we are working with our schools to address areas before somebody external tells us. But I am referencing Estyn because it is an example outside of the authority's control of the improvements that are happening in the system and the ways in which our school leaders and our governing bodies are improving schools. Now, are they all improving at the same rate? No. But is there quality intervention support going in them to improve at the fastest pace? Yes, there is. But we are education improvement. It takes time. That doesn't mean you can be complacent about it. But GCSE outcomes in the summer will be a point of proving. Post-16 outcomes will be a point of proving. The termly attendance and exclusion monitoring is a point of you having quantitative data as evidence of improvement or not.
But we've got higher than average authorised absence rates in our school. We haven't got a secondary school or an all-through school that's meeting the targets for attendance. And whilst our exclusions have reduced, is this because those children aren't even in school? My point being, if we can't get our pupils into school, how can we deliver for their education?
Absolutely. Which is why attendance is a focus of the work that we're doing to get our learners into school, to better understand the needs of individual learners, how we monitor, how we track, what strategies we use, so that our schools and school leaders can get our young people in Powys coming through the doors of our schools. The observation, Councillor Ange, that you make about exclusions, absolutely, it's in the paper. Previously, we have never made an observation such as that. We have just simply presented exclusion data. But now we are presenting to the committee that, startling observation that while exclusions are going down across the authority, the most vulnerable are exclusions are rising. So that is what this analysis and evaluation has done. It has brought that into the public domain. It has brought that into the thinking of us as an authority so we can target it. Previously, we weren't there.
So you're saying that now you know it, you're going to do something about it?
Of course. Now we know.
Sally's nodding away.
Absolutely. But we didn't know this before.
I kind of think we did, Dr. Richard, didn't we?
Well, okay, we are just recirculating now. So Dr. Richard's given you an answer, Angela. He's tried to convince you, but I think Dr. Richard will understand your passion to see improvement. IRIG's coming in to help.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just on the point of the early years inspection profile, yes, we're very proud of our inspection profile. None of our early years settings are in there, and we do an awful lot of work to support them. However, the inspection areas there are not quite the same as into schools as well. So I don't want to paint the picture that everything's rosy inside there, because there's a joint inspection profile for early years where it's Care Inspectorate for Wales and Estyn, whereas in schools it is just Estyn as well. We are in our 4th year of the implementation of the curriculum for Wales, and those pupils now are making progress into our primary schools as well. And across Powys, we have over 90% of our primary schools that are doing very well, and pupils are doing very well inside there. We have few of our less than 10% of our schools within Estyn follow-up. That is improving, and even improving now. And even our Estyn inspections this year in our primary schools have been successful inspections. So we are improving there. It is taking time to actually show that, and then give Councillor Angela and the rest of the scrutiny the showing that it is actually there. But there is an improvement happening, and it's feeding through from early years into primary. It will take that time then to go into secondary as well. We're very clear as a school improvement team, and you will have heard this before because I've spoken to you about that transition period from year 5, year 6, year 7, year 8 are crucial years where we do not lose education for those pupils and we continue to challenge them. That is still a challenge. It's a national challenge as well as in Powys, but we are trying to break that by working with our schools, getting the right transition in place so that we can actually improve on teaching, not just looking at the learner, what the learner can do and making a nice transition in there. Actually, can we ensure that teaching and the standard of teaching continues and that progress is made as soon as they hit that year 7, so that year 6, 7 doesn't become that point where pupils don't learn. We need to ensure that that is there. And that is an issue which we are dealing with in terms of our support into schools, the training that we're giving to our teachers so that we can really focus on that, because then that will then give them a launchpad into their secondary education and ultimately then improve on GCSE results as well and maintain that enthusiasm. Because I take on board Councillor Andrew's point about enthusiasm in learning. I mentioned it slightly earlier in the meeting. Pupils have to be enthused. If they're not enthused, how do they learn? So we need to ensure that we are really pushing that, enthusing their learning. And we've got that in our early years. We're having that in our primary schools. Let's now build on that into our secondaries. And that's not to say our secondaries aren't doing that, but we need to improve on that as well.
Thank you, Eirik. I'm going to give Councillor Sue an opportunity once again, but obviously having a few IT problems, and I'll go to Councillor Sue. There we go.
Thank you, Chair.
There you go, Sue.
Sorry about that earlier on. Thank you for the report, Dr. Richard and the team. I mean, lots of info and data there for us to digest. My hand has been up such a long time that 2 of the things I wanted to ask have actually been answered. One was about the inequality between our schools, and I think Dr. Richard and his team have answered that quite extensively now. And the other point I wanted to make was about attendance, because we see in every governing body meeting I go to, attendance is at the top of the agenda in primary and senior secondary, but worse in secondary. But I can see that you have now started to address this. So that is what I wanted to say, Chair. And thank you for coming back. Thank you for coming back to me.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. Sarah, you've had your hand up as well, so you've obviously picking up on some things that's been said previously.
Yeah, it was just to come in around attendance, if that was okay,
Yeah,
Chair.
of course you can.
And noting the comments that the committee have made, and there are some improvements demonstrated in the later paper in respect of attendance as a whole. But I just wanted to give a quick overview of support provided to schools. So looking at kind of like a system-wide approach, working with attendance leads to share effective practice, as was raised earlier. It's really important that we share effective practice, and actually very recently we were looking and a particular head teacher was sharing their approach to approving holidays or not, as the case may be, but also of investigating those areas for improvement across the county, working together on those. Then at a school level, the education welfare officers are working with schools on whole school attendance strategies, looking at working with the school to identify those areas that need further improvement. But I think it's also important to say that work's required on an individual basis as well, with individual learners. Having a person-centred approach to understand the barriers to accessing education that may be there, and working with them and their families to secure improvement, whether that's bringing in a family liaison officer or other professionals to support in the identified areas of need. It's just a quick overview there.
Thanks, Sarah. That certainly helps us there. Thank you. Councillor Gareth and then Councillor Lucy. And I'm thinking maybe I'll have to bring this agenda item to because we've got some recommendations and another agenda item. So Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've just got 2 points. The first one's a question to Chris. I think I know the answer. He mentioned about the data being provided by MEDA is either on an establishment basis or postcode basis. Would I be right in assuming that doesn't include those learners that are out of county in Herefordshire, in England? Yeah, okay. My second point is around ALN. How much and exclusions, how much of the high level of exclusion for ALN pupils could be linked to what I think is the underfunding in ALN, especially around the schools' IDPs and the LEAs, local authority IDPs.
Anybody? Judith. Your microphone, Judith.
Diolch,
There we go.
Councillor Gwynfor. I don't think we can make that sweeping statement, Councillor Gareth. I appreciate where you're coming from, and there are concerns around funding levels, which we are looking at, as I approached in the last meeting. I take that on board. I think there's a lot to be said about the fact that almost 60% of our children with ALN have SEBD and ASD as their primary level of need. So we are looking at,
Sorry, SEPD, BD?
Sorry, social emotional behavioural
Okay, thank you.
difficulties. Apologies. So we are looking at a cohort of children who have specific needs within that larger cohort as well. And that's something we're doing a piece of work around. So we are looking at upskilling staff around ASD. We are putting in a package of training support for our specialist centres initially to be rolled out across the sector with the Autism Education Trust. So we've got a better understanding of their need and how we respond to that. And we are also, as I previously mentioned, looking at emotional based school avoidance, which impacts on attendance as well. So I take on board your point, Councillor Gareth. I don't think it can be a sweeping statement, but absolutely needs to be looked at.
Yeah, and I think
there's a bigger agenda there.
Yeah, I think you answered my question in the second half of your response about the strategies you're following to take forward that. Linking that back to your previous, when you were head teacher, does that include any community focus work as well, involving other agencies?
Absolutely, it's got a huge impact on children's attendance, and our community focus schools are placed strategically where there is a highest level of disadvantaged across our authority, and that is based hugely upon multi-agency involvement in schools and at a family level with individual children and their families. And I think I've said that several times before. When we look at attendance, yes, we look at it strategically. Yes, we look at it from a school's point of view. But more importantly, we're dealing with very vulnerable and often disadvantaged families where there's a huge agenda of support needed on a multi-agency level. And for our attendance strategy, we really need to look at it granularly at this level as well, because it has a huge impact on children being able to access school. Thank you. Diolch.
Thank you. Do you think there's any schools using exclusions as a cry for help?
I wouldn't say it's a cry for help. I think they do use them where they have to use them, because it is a strategy for schools to reset, for children to reset, and to acknowledge the level of need there. So there is a place for it. I don't think it's the answer in all the cases, and that's work we need to do with our schools at looking at strategies for support around these children. And like I said earlier, strategies for training and upskilling our schools and our officers within the authority on how we can best support these children.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Judith. And Karen has certainly put her hand up there as well. So come on, Karen.
Yeah, Borda. It's just another example, really, of something that I think is probably had an effect on the reduced exclusions, and hopefully will continue to do so. So we have behaviour consultation panel. That's a fairly new thing, as in it is much more frequent than it used to be. It is multi-agency. We have youth services, we have EWS there, and schools can come to that panel and actually discuss a child that they might be experiencing challenging behaviour with. So it's that early intervention, and it's getting in there much earlier. And our outcomes from there don't need to go to another panel. They come straight from that panel. They can be outreach, they can be pre-placement, they can be support and advice, training. etc. So I think that's been a really strong strategy that has probably had an impact, and obviously will continue to do so.
Thanks, Karen,
Thank
for
you.
assisting there. Councillor Lucy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I wanted to come back in on post-16 education, please. And the committee's concerns about the fact that the post-16 or A to A and A to C results are below or well down compared with others nationally. We're wondering why is it that the number of A-level entries is decreasing as well? And is that because people are choosing to go out of county? And if they are choosing to go out of county, is that because they can't get the subjects that they want within county, or is it because they're concerned that they're not getting the level of teaching that they would wish for? And also, are we seeing a result of the highest performing learners going out of county to seek that wider breadth of curriculum? Yeah, so some questions around post-16 really, please.
Yeah, basically progress.
Yeah.
Chris.
Diolch, Chair. In answer to your question, Councillor Lucy, that those points are factors in what we are seeing. But again, it is a complex picture, and reasons do vary depending on each learner. Sometimes a learner will want to go based on the academic success of an establishment over the border, perhaps, or the combination of subjects isn't available in their setting, or the reasons. There are many reasons for it. On the point of we've done a huge piece of research recently with ORS, speaking to learners in the county, so that will feature in the future paper coming through, which should hopefully help give a real clear picture of the factors which are influencing learners' decision making on their post-16 pathways.
Dr. Richard. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. Teaching and learning is not where it needs to be at Key Stage 5 across our schools. We have not invested like we have in teaching at Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5. I think it's become forgotten over time. That, coupled with the shrinking of the curriculum, meaning that we've got learners who are remaining in our sixth forms, potentially on courses that they are not suited to or they don't want to do. And that's based on the fact that we can see our percentage of U grades going up. I think it speaks to the point that there are learners on courses that are not the right ones for them. And I think they are they are really two very straightforward observations around the current position in our schools. How we are addressing that. So we've strengthened the quality assurance of Key Stage 5 in schools. So whereas previously school improvement advisors had very little engagement with Key Stage 5 in our schools. So they didn't look at Key Stage 5 lessons. They didn't look at Key Stage 5 books or what they produce in the more practical subjects. They didn't speak to learners. They weren't undertaking systematic reviews of teaching at Key Stage 5, and we have changed that. So the level of focus on Key Stage 5 from the authority is the same as it is at Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 3. The second thing we have changed to address this in the short term, we've never provided targeted leadership support for our heads of sixth forms in Powys. We now have our advisors working directly with those leaders responsible for sixth form provision in school to better evaluate, to better plan and put in place strategies to raise attainment. But it ultimately, Councillor Lucy, right now for our learners comes down to the quality of teaching and the narrowness of the curriculum offer. And all of the engagement work that Chris's team have led, that's what our learners are telling us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Richard. I think Lucy makes an important point, though, and yes, we're developing a new strategy, etc. But we're unclear where that strategy sits, and I'll just remind that members were supposed to have a member development session back in January. So I think we need to concentrate on this so that members are brought up to date as well. Councillor Angela, and then followed by Councillor Gareth will be the last point.
So thank you for that. I think that does give us an outline that we've got some new knowledge that we didn't have before. So I think there's some optimism there, because you've got to know where you are to be able to know where you're going. So thank you for that. So that's a positive from me. Maybe I'll give you that. But what I want to know, we know what our pupils do at GCSE. We have their results and we know who we are. Do we track them? So do we know which pupils are staying within our schools? I get, we perhaps don't have. Yeah. So are we, you've given us lots of reasons of what might be happening. I think Chris, wasn't it, who explained that there's lots of different reasons why our pupils, and you've said it's about the options that they have available to them, the options perhaps they take, and the delivery of that and everything. But I'm just wondering, are we able to say that any of our schools are delivering what they deliver well? Is it, basically, I just want to know, do you have the data behind it to understand? Is it the fact that all our brightest pupils are going out of county or going out of Powys education into FE colleges? Basically, do you have that data? Are you tracking that? I mean, we know you have it, but are you tracking it? Are you using it? Yeah.
Chair,
Come on, Chris.
No, Chair, could I ask my questions on?
Go on then.
Yeah, my question is very linked to Angela's. I was wondering, have we tracked the A star select B or C's and the Cap 9 scores for those that stay in county and those that go out of county? And I think we have got one very successful sixth form in my mind, which is Crickhowell. It's at high standards for, and I'd be interested to know what work is being done by the authority to see what they're doing to make it right, and how that can be then used across the authority.
Yeah, come on, Chris.
Diolch, Chair. Yes, we do. We don't have learner level data. With the ALPS platform, we have a holistic view of just learners, but not by not by name or anything like that. But we do see what ALPS gives us is a picture of the progress made of those learners from year 12, from year 11, from their starting point to where they're finishing. This benchmarked against the national data set. So we do have a degree, that data to a degree, but that's something certainly schools will have, obviously at a more granular level, and they would be able to track that through. And that's something, obviously, working with the leadership of Post 16 is some of the things Dr. Richard was talking about improving how schools are tapping into that data. Additionally, as well, what we see at ALPS is what's uploaded from the school. So there's a degree on relying on what is uploaded. If there's been some remarks or changes to the data, if it hasn't been updated, our picture can be a little bit distorted sometimes. So it is definitely something which the schools will have a clear picture of. In terms of Councillor Gareth, I believe your question was talking about the learners who leave us to go out of county as well. Yeah, as I said, that data, we wouldn't have access to that data, unfortunately.
Okay.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? Perhaps this is to Dr. Richard. I think this is what work is being undertaken by Powys to liaise with the colleges in Shrewsbury, Hereford, etc., to get that data for those pupils that live in, those learners that live in Powys? Because I would have thought that's an essential part of data that we require for when we're looking at our next step for the Post 16.
Yeah, Councillor Gareth, you're absolutely right. So Chris and Chris's team have collected destination data for our learners, but it is quite a clunky process at the moment. It involves the team contacting colleges, contacting other providers to ask them for that data. So in our Post 16 planning workshop, which we did with the economy team and Ceredigion last week.
Yeah, sorry, Dr. Richard, that wasn't the question I asked. I asked the question, what links have you done as Director of Education with the colleges yourself?
So that's what I'm answering.
Okay.
So we are gathering destination data from all of those partners. That's informing our understanding of where our learners are going. We are sharing that across services of the council and with our partner colleagues in other local authorities to shape the long-term strategy. So I work and liaise very closely with a range of different providers, joint executive team meetings with the MPTC group as an example, and providers across the border as well to help us access that data. However, there is a key point. We need to be gathering that data before our learners leave Powys. It's really difficult after the event because we are then relying on Hereford or Shrewsbury to tell us and to tell us accurately about what Powys learners are doing. So we agreed a change of process last week, whereby we will be asking schools to collect that destination data, which should streamline the process and make it more accurate.
Thank you.
Chris is coming in to add to that as well.
It was just a very small point that there's absolutely no obligation on the colleges across the border from us to work with us. Thankfully, we've developed really good relationships with the majority of them, and we've been able to get that information sharing. The relationship has improved, and we've met with pretty much all of the main providers across. But yes, ultimately, if a college does not want to engage or share that data, we have no way of making them do that.
Just one final follow-up question, Chair. Section 5.2.2 has got a table around quality indicator scores and ALPS. I want to just, if Chris could or Sally could just give us a very brief explanation of what 0.94 means in 24-25 as an example.
Sure. Can I just come back in on that one, of course, Councillor Gareth. So with the way the ALPS data works is a very brief sort of overview. At the start, a minimum expected grade is produced in ALPS. This is an aspirational target based on the national data set, which is tied to the learner's prior attainment and is benchmarked against the top 25% nationally to ensure that it's aspirational. So it basically asks us what each student is expected to achieve based on similar students nationally.
Okay.
Following on from that, then the measures. What the second part of it is where the scores then, or at the subject level, it measures how much progress a student has made compared with their expected trajectory, and then the QI indicators. They give an overall quality measure comparing outcomes to the national data set using the 1 to 9 grades, but then you get a QI score within that. So in general terms, every 0.2 equates to, on average, a grade either way. So if it was 0.8, it would be that everyone missed their minimum expected grade by 1.
So a 0.94 means that everybody's missed their expected grade by a quarter of a grade.
On average, yes.
On average. Okay, thank you.
I'm still not sure I understood that, Chris. But,
Sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. I'll take that. Hey, members, that's that. I'm going to bring this agenda item to an end. There's much that we haven't covered, but obviously time is never on our side. Is members content, or is there anything really pressing that they still want to make? Okay, that takes us to item 5 on the agenda.
Sally's got her hand up, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Sally. Go on.
That's all right, because Chris answered the ALPS question, so I just wanted to come in and say something about the responsibility that lies with schools for tracking this A-level data as well. And that's something else that my team, the Learning and Improvement team, are working closely with post-16 leaders to develop, is a much better understanding of the ALPS data. Again, ALPS is something, correct me if I'm wrong here now, Chris, we pay for that as a local authority for our schools. It's not a kind of nationally verified in the same way that CATS, cognitive assessment tests that I mentioned earlier, ALPS is our equivalent of that at A level. So that's a system of tracking data and tracking the outcomes of learners that we are supporting our schools to engage in, but their ability to interrogate that data with real strength and understanding is something that continues to need work, and something that we need to continue to challenge them on when we have conversations that now include post-16 in a way that hadn't previously, as Dr. Richard outlined, through our monitoring visits, when we are looking, as I did recently in one of our secondary schools in the south of the county. I was in the school quality assuring the work of the school improvement advisor and saw myself, I observed lessons myself firsthand, talk to a subject leader, an area lead, about results across the board, including post-16, and the variability with which those leaders post-16 or leaders of subjects can talk about meaningfully about the data that they're collecting is something that needs a significant amount of work, because destination data, it hasn't been a huge priority for our schools. We as an LA are trying to chase after those destinations, but understanding where your learners move on to is going to become a much stronger part of the performance measures under the new Curriculum for Wales qualifications going forward, when the new suite of performance measures come in for the 2027 qualifications. So there'll be a ramped up expectation around schools understanding that data better, which can only make our job as a local authority easier in terms of helping them to interpret that and understand that, and helping us to have that knowledge as well about where our learners are going and why.
Thank you very much, Sally. All clear now? Good. We'll move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is scrutiny recommendations of the Performance and Standard Improvement Report. Anybody going to contribute first? I will start on about the recommendation surrounding leadership capacity and accountability, particularly around middle leaders, etc. Is everybody content with that? That was a point that I made. Angela?
Yeah, so is there any way we could do something about tracking? So it said that literacy outcomes for 9 out of 11 secondary and all age schools are below modelled expectations. So it tells us that in the report. But, you know, if our children can't read or do simple maths, they're not going to do anything else, are they? So I'm wondering, what were the outcomes of these pupils at primary school? Is there any way we can backtrack or forward track so that we can see what's happening? No, Sally's shaking her head.
We can make a recommendation that a framework is created. Would that? Okay. It's a recommendation.
Yeah.
Sally, you can.
Literacy is so important, isn't it?
Sally, you can reject the recommendation if you want, but it's a recommendation that Scrutiny would like to see in place, perhaps.
Just wanted to offer some context around the frameworks that exist out there that we should be using as part of Curriculum for Wales. So the literacy and numeracy frameworks, they're not as good, I'll say that really honestly, as the old LNF. And we often regularly advise our schools to use the old LNF, which was much sharper, broken down in much more granular detail about what progression looks like in a particular skill area within oracy, reading, writing. So we are encouraging our schools to use those old LNF. I think it's only a matter of time that the government is going to change their mind around the non-statutory nature of the current guidance, and we will see a revert to that old way of tracking. So it's coming, I think, potentially.
So could we make some recommendation that you're more robust in your recommendation to school? Do you know what I mean? In encouraging them to use that, maybe. Yeah. And my other one, Chair, is there was a mention of the behaviour working group. Is there any way we could make some recommendation to find out more about that? Could we have a deep dive into that? Because, you know, we hear in all our schools behaviour is an issue that's impacting on learning for the rest of the cohort, and I assume for that individual. So could there be something around that?
I'm sure we can build something into it. Yeah, we'll have a think about that, Angela, and we'll probably add it into something in relation to attendance or something like that. Councillor Gareth?
Yeah. 2 points, Chair. The first one is to back up the one that Angela said about tracking, but perhaps that could be included if we do invite a teacher to, and his or her management team to come and discuss how they track performance through from year 7 through to the end of year 11, year 13. I think that would be good. And I'll beat my drum again. I have got major concerns about ALN. And I think we need to do, alongside Judith, some sort of deep dive into ALN. I just think we just need to do something around that and some benchmarking etc.
It's a consistent theme out of scrutiny, isn't it, Gareth?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah. Lucy?
Yeah, just going back to the Welsh medium education and having some analysis of how the Welsh medium pupils are doing and including when they transfer into or out of Welsh medium education.
Yeah, so it's just examination of the data, strengthening that data, and having the transparency so that we can identify Welsh medium pupils or the effect of immersion and trochee on that. Councillor Clare.
Yeah, again, going back to my point just on that consistency of data presentation and a clear reference to that so that we can draw down the trends. Going back, actually, it's linked to the tracking element and making sure that going forward to get that more informed, granular analysis that we're actually tracking pupil movements in and out of county at year 7 and year 12. Just again to refine it, not an overnight thing, but for just moving forward.
Good. That's reasonable. I also think Dr. Richards' request of deep diving into a school and seeing where improvement or what has been done, I think that would be a useful recommendation. And we also need something around post-16 as well, like a destination tracker or something like that. So should we formulate a recommendation surrounding post-16 as well? Is everybody content then? Okay. If that's the case, we'll move on to item 6 on the agenda, attendance and exclusion report. We've had some conversations in relation to attendance already, but we didn't really go into any depth, so this is an opportunity to develop that a little bit further. Councillor James has now left the meeting, so Dr. Richards, shall I come to yourself? Brief introduction.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks so much, Chair. So I'll pass over to Judith in a moment, who is ready to do the introduction. But just to say, so this report now is your deep dive report into the autumn term attendance and exclusions. So the previous report, as you know, was almost an end of year summary point, and this now is the deep dive around what has happened over the autumn and brings you to our current position. Okay, so I'll hand over to Jude and Sarah now, who are ready to take you through it.
Thank you very much, Richard. Come on, Sarah. Judith, please.
Diolch yn fawr. Okay, I won't go through the whole paper for you because you've read that in depth. I'll just pick up some high-level points for you to note and obviously question as we move forward. So from this autumn term, it is important to note that attendance both at primary and secondary level has improved and we are meeting our targets. Primary attendance is above national averages and our targets and up on last year. There's been a reduction in persistence absence at primary level and the attendance at CLAR learners has improved quite considerably and is above the national average. However, as always, there's an however, the attendance of EFSM learners is slightly lower than what we would expect, and that of ALN learners is a cause for concern for us. At secondary attendance level, as I mentioned earlier, there has been an improvement and we now are at target level. Persistent absence and unauthorised absence is down. There's an improved picture. However, authorised absence is up, as are our concerns around the vulnerable groups of learners, such as EFSM learners, ALN learners, and CLAR learners. Boys' attendance is better than girls' attendance, which is something that is always a little bit of a surprise. And that's sort of the picture that the paper produces with regard to attendance. When we speak about exclusions, there is a more positive picture of improvement around exclusions. We are performing relatively well in relation to the other 22 local authorities, but we would expect that with regard to exclusions. In the autumn term, the downward trend in exclusions noted in 2024-25 is sustained. There have been 78 or 79 fewer exclusions in this autumn term in comparison to last autumn term. And the number of days of exclusion have also reduced significantly when we look at autumn term last year. However, that comes with a caveat that our more vulnerable groups of learners do not fare so well. Our ALN learners and our EFSM learners are the group which we see most exclusions for. More boys than girls are being excluded as well. I think that gives you just highlight statements around the whole paper. Like Dr. Richards said, it is a paper deep diving into this autumn term's exclusions and looking in quite some detail at evaluating how we are where we are and what we intend to do about it in the future. Happy to take any questions around the paper, Councillor Gwynfor.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. Anybody got any further to ask before we go to questions? Councillor Gareth has got his hand up. Anybody opposite? No? Okay, Councillor Gareth.
Just one quick question, Chair. Thank you. In terms of attendance, is there any evidence of those learners that are school phobics or got very low attendance have been moved into home education rather than school? I'm just wondering, is that an impact of why the attendance levels are improved at all? Or is it just that we're doing better monitoring and better supporting those learners to come back to school more? Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, just in response to your question, Councillor Gareth, I've reviewed the data of the learners that became EHE during the autumn term and the prevalence or not of exclusions. And I am pleased to say that it is the latter half of your question that our tracking and monitoring is improved. Of the 76 learners that were registered as EHE, and please note that many others would have been deregistered at the same time, 8 had an exclusion in the previous academic year, and of those, half, so 4, had one singular exclusion.
Okay, yeah, because I'm going to go in a body with secondary school, and I've noted that the attendance at that school has improved significantly over the last 12 months. Even think the counting of the sickness bug that swept through the school, I think, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Judith's coming back.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor Gareth. We have an increased focus on attendance as we speak. It is something that we are really delving deep into, and is something that is really important and on our radar. And we are seeing small green shoots of improvement. However, we still need to focus on attendance, particularly for those vulnerable groups.
And I'm not sure I'm not sure whether I should make this comment about girls' attendance against boys' attendance. Is there any evidence that perhaps girls' non-attendance may be linked to the menstrual cycle at all?
I think there are a number of factors which influence it, Dr. Gareth. That probably is one of those factors.
Okay. Yeah.
I think socially, there's a lot of expectations around girls and they go through quite difficult times through puberty, obviously. So I think that is one of the factors, but there's a bigger picture there as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sarah.
Yeah, and just to add to Judith's comments, there was a national attendance conference probably about 18 months ago, and it noted that as a national picture, so it's not just specific to Powys.
Thanks, Sarah, that helps. Councillor Angela.
Councillor Gareth stole my thunder there on the girls' question. He might have wished he waited. But it is an interesting change, isn't it? Because it used to be that boys' attendance was always worse than girls. So we've got to change around. So I'm wondering, is it that we've improved boys' attendance and girls is always where it is? Or has girls' attendance actually declined? You know, what the different thing? So have we worked so well at getting boys in, but we've left the girls behind? Am I making sense? And the other thing I'm thinking, so our unauthorised attendance or unattendance is improving, which is good. All the strategies are working, but the authorised attendance is not. So is there something around there that we're making it kind of okay for children? We're saying, okay, it's okay for you to be absent now because you're going on holiday or whatever. And I'm recalling back to many decades ago when my children first started school. You had to sign an agreement, a homeschool agreement. The pupil, the school, the parent had to sign, and you had to adhere to the rules. Do you remember? And head teachers in those days used to hold up to those rules. You get the form out and remind you that you'd signed. And there was kind of a bit of peer pressure to not be absent from school for the children, but also for the parents. And I wonder, do we have things like that now? Probably easier in primary, I suppose.
Go on, Judith.
Okay, so it's not a statutory requirement, Councillor Angela, for homeschool agreements to exist any longer. I think schools work with families around that agenda. We have, through our attendance network, increased the level of communication that's going out to families about the impact that attendance has when families take holidays outside of school time. But that is a decision for schools to make themselves. I think in the paper we've cited, we need to do a bit of work around how schools are implementing attendance policies and the consistency of that. And that's something that we are looking to do quite in the near future. Sarah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add very specifically that the linkage between attendance and exclusions, because exclusions are authorised absence. So if a school it has high levels of exclusion, it will have higher levels of authorised absence.
Okay, yeah, I hadn't thought about that link. Yeah, thank you for that. So my other thing, if I can then, Chair, going back on the girls' higher absence, behaviour, we know that behaviour is an issue in some schools, and you've got the behaviour working group, so we're recognising that. I'm wondering, is there any impact on, does the behaviour of the cohort put some girls off going to school? Have we done any sort of gender study in that way? We hear a lot in the press, don't we, in the workplace about toxicity towards women, and I'm wondering, have we got any evidence? Have we looked into, is that happening within our schools and putting girls off attending?
Is it all right to come back in?
Yes, come on.
Yeah, I think just picking up on Judith's previous point, Councillor Angela, this is a piece of work that we're going to be doing quite rapidly with our schools to try and get underneath the detail and understand a bit further.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you. Is that a legacy hand there, Judith? Yeah.
Sorry, yes, it is. Apologies.
Yes, all right. We'll go to Sally.
Wouldn't let me take my mute off there. I thought somebody was overriding that then for a second. Apologies. I just wanted to make a broader point really about girls, boys, different groups of learners, the need for all learners to have a sense of belonging in school, and whatever the reason a learner might feel that they are unable to attend, the whole school approach to emotional health and mental well-being fosters a culture in schools where every learner is valued, every learner is made to feel inclusive and belong. And if our schools are working towards that whole school approach, as many of them are, and we've put a lot of professional learning into that space to ensure that schools are places of belonging, building on those key pathways from early years right through up until the most challenging times in adolescence, when young people, boys or girls, can often feel ostracized and excluded from their peer groups, from their communities. You know, that it's about their mental health and emotional well-being in the bigger round, really, for all groups of learners. I just wanted to sort of make that observation, really, which I'm sure the committee is fully aware of.
Thanks, Sally. We'll go to Councillor Lucy, then followed by Councillor Clare.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask about post-16 attendance, and I appreciate that I think that's not a statutory requirement, but it would be really interesting, given the poor results at post-16, to understand whether pupils are attending the lessons that they should be, but also are they in school at times when they're not directly being taught? Because I think in the past, and it may vary from school to school, some schools require pupils to be in school all the time, and others perhaps less so. So it would be interesting to have some comparison and how that impacts on results.
Thank you, Lucy. Anybody wishing to pick up on that one? Sarah.
I can come in, and maybe Chris may want to come in also. We do record and monitor post-16 attendance, Councillor Lucy, so while it's not in the paper, we do record it, and in the attendance reports that are sent to schools on a termly basis, it is included. Chris would be better placed to speak about this than me, but certainly generally post-16 learners aren't expected to be in for the full week, but may well, as you suggest, be in at some times where there isn't a timetabled lesson, but they may be in undertaking some learning.
Sarah's got that exactly right, Chair, and you know, added to that the complexities around collaborative travel and the ysgol lessons, where learners can be in a room by them, you know, in a small group, where but the lessons being delivered elsewhere. There are some complexities around the post-16 attendance, but and schools do have varying approaches to that, as Sarah outlined there.
Thanks, Chris and Sarah. Councillor Clare.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to ask officers about the support for schools from, I don't know what you'd call them. They used to be the truant officer in my day. It was probably something like attendance support or something is the modern equivalent. Just in terms of how many we've got, and geographically, are they, you know, able to get to those schools to help with that? One of the feedback I often get as a governor of a secondary school is that a lot of the time it's teaching staff that are having to do that sort of follow up and sort of attendance chasing, which then takes them out of teaching, which is a bit worrying for me. So just wondering what the resource is like around that, and whether there's more that we can be doing corporately to help schools.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Just to develop that a bit further, it was a question which I'd like clarity on, is what the support that is in place, and particularly around exclusions in relation to schools having to exclude pupils as a last resort. I just wonder what sort of support is in place to help schools with that, and perhaps a bit of a flavour on what those exclusions, the report doesn't identify what the exclusions are for and what behaviour is existing, and I think that would help us as a scrutiny committee as well. So I think Claire raises an important point there. Sarah.
If I could cover attendance first, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Because that's the area of support that education welfare officers predominantly support with. So we have 6 across the county. They do visit each of their schools regularly. We amended the approach that the Education Welfare Service take to visiting schools at the beginning of September to make it more targeted. Previously, we would have a set kind of frequency, so for secondaries and for primary, but what we realised is actually where a school is doing well with their attendance, they just need the universal or base level of support. Where a school needs further support, we need to provide that. So we're a bit more flexible and responsive to the needs of the school. I think to pick up on the point raised, it is a dual responsibility. So the requirements for schools and local authorities is set out very clearly in belonging, engaging and participating, which picks up on Sally's previous point about learners needing to belong, but it clearly outlines the school level interventions and when education welfare officer should become involved with a particular learner. And broadly speaking, that's when schools have exhausted all practical avenues that they can. But I think beneath that, we work together in partnership. That the school would be having early conversations with the education welfare officer about learners that may require support or where there may be barriers to education. There would be informal discussions and support put in place. But when something becomes more complex, the school may put in that formal referral.
That's a good answer. Thanks you, Sarah. I'm just looking at some of the Estin recommendations as you speak, and one of the concerns of Estin were that we don't act quick enough in the beginning. Can we have that assurance now that is in place on the back of what you've just answered us, Dr. Richard? Richard, your microphone, please.
Sorry, yeah, Chair, you're happy to give that assurance in terms of how we're working as an authority, but also what we're seeing at school level. I can use a really recent example. Yesterday, I was in Mysotherin Comprehensive with a head teacher and did some learning walks in that school, so saw some things firsthand for myself. What I did see, and it's borne out in the statistical evidence of a reduction of exclusions in Mysotherin, is a new approach that school is adopting, where they have trained staff around de-escalation strategies. They're intervening really early because they know their pupils well. They've created some safe spaces in the school, a nurture room and an inclusion area. So that's an example of a school really stepping in when they can see a learner dysregulating and putting in the right provision before it gets to that, that absolute crisis point of behaviour which results in permanent exclusion. Now, there'll always be the one-off incident in a school that results in an exclusion, but what I saw in Mysotherin yesterday was a really strategic approach to early intervention, and it's playing out in the impact it's having in terms of reduced exclusion. So yes to the assurance at local authority level, but equally, our schools are working hard to be inclusive environments for young people.
Thank you, Dr. Richard. Councillor Angela.
Yeah, we've heard a bit about these interventions, and they are really important, aren't they? Particularly at high school, we're hearing in the press, there was one the other day of quite young children doing some quite violent things within their school. So, we need to be alert to these things. So in the report, we've talked briefly about the behaviour working group, but it talks about the EBSA rollout to 9 secondary schools and the Adele Bates programme, I don't know that one, to 4 schools. Chris mentioned the virtual school. So I'm just wondering, do we do then some reviewing of that? Because there's a cost to these strategies, isn't there? And there have been loads of others in the past, haven't there? There's always some sort of programme that's going to be the fix-all, and I appreciate there is no such thing as a fix-all. But do we check how effective they were? Were they value for money in terms of results? And if they're really good, do we roll them out to all schools? So just a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah, I think value for money is the key there. There's a few got your hands up there. Sarah or Karen, whoever jumps in first.
Do you want me to go first, Sarah? Yeah, hopefully I can just give you a little bit more information around those interventions and strategies. So the Adele Bates programme was some late grant funding that came in from Welsh Government that needed to be used, and behaviour, was on our agenda to support schools. So Mysotherin was the first school that Dr. Richard just talked about, the first school to be involved in the programme, and is just about coming to the end. And they had a little bit of an extension. So that will be fully evaluated through Adele Bates, and I work closely with them, the company, to do that. Once that's that one's the first one coming to an end, the other schools that they're working with are still in the programme. And you know, we have monthly updates. We can discuss anything that might be of concern. What we're receiving back currently is some really positive feedback, to the point where one school has gone to a school that wasn't on the programme and said it's brilliant, so they've come to us and said, can we have it? So it's that, you know, that word of mouth, and that actually on the ground, that school's really pleased with the progress they've made and what they've had through that programme. So that's spreading. So yes, every single school will have a full evaluation, and I'm happy to bring that back to scrutiny when that's completed. And we have one primary schools that has been added to that programme because of some additional grant funding that we had. So that will be fully evaluated and brought back, obviously, at some point when they finish their programmes. And Behaviour Working Group, I can just pick up on that as well, Councillor Angela. So that's quite new initiative. It started in September. We do half-termly meetings. Obviously, we're very... we need to be mindful of school and their capacity to come out. It is a strategic working group, so it is head teachers, a couple of ALNCOs and a couple of pastoral leads, but mostly head teachers come to that. It's special schools, mainstream schools, primary, secondary, LA officers, virtual school, health and wellbeing, everybody around the table, basically. So we've only had 3 meetings, but what's come out of that is several pieces of work. So we've looked at exclusion definitions, we've looked at PSPs and the use of those, obviously linked to attendance, and everything that happens within those working groups, then those head teachers are taken back to their clusters so that all schools benefit from that behaviour working group. We've increased the attendance on that. So at the next meeting, I can say we have somebody from every single cluster, because we did recognise there were a couple of clusters not there. So we're hoping that originally it was going to be concluded in the summer term, but I think we're going to go through to the autumn term. And what we'd like at the end of that is a whole POWIS behaviour strategy. So we've looked at training that schools want, they've fed that back to us, we've done a draft menu of support. So that's the sort of work we're doing. Again, I'm happy to bring it back in more detail if needed later on.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And Margaret's not here, but I know the one thing Margaret would be saying to us is prevention is better than cure, and early intervention is the best thing we could do. And I just wonder, you know, when you've had challenging pupils raised, or concerns about pupils with challenging behaviour raised at primary level, you know, I do think we need some confidence that they're somehow on the radar as they move to high school, because as you've already said, you know, the challenges for pupils when they hit puberty become bigger, don't they? And that's when things go drastically wrong.
Yeah,
so just making that plea.
Yeah, a little bit there. The behaviour consultation that I spoke about earlier, that actual panel, it's been in place for about a year now, and I think that has a direct impact, because that support is much more timely and immediate from that panel. It doesn't have to go through anywhere else for sort of ratification and agreement. The other thing that what we would like to come out of this behaviour working group is to have some sort of behaviour team in Paris. That's probably something that we realise is missing as in specialists, but we have changed the way we worked very recently, in as much as if we have an inkling that a school is struggling, we will put in place a team around the school. I've done this very recently with a school up in the north. It was a primary school struggling not just with challenging behaviour. There were several different parts linked to ALN, linked to attendance, linked to tribunals, all sorts of things that they were going through. So we put a team around that school, and in a very timely manner over a month or so, we've supported them. And had that feedback from them that worked really well, and they were really grateful. So that's sort of where we're hoping to take the work that we're doing on behaviour forward. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Dr. Richard and then Sarah, please. Richard, your microphone.
Sorry, Chair, it's the second time I've done that. I just wanted to come in on the point around the off-the-shelf packages, just to provide the committee with some assurance that we are now actually very carefully choosing what packages and partners we work with. I think in the past we've worked with too many. They pop up and then they vanish, and they ultimately do damage because it's really short-termist. So now we have narrowed down the companies or the partners that we have. we always work with other authorities to see if they've had impact in other places in Wales. But probably the most important point I want to make is when we work with organisations like Adele Bates, etc., they are working with our schools to upskill our staff in schools. So we've got to be certain that when these organisations withdraw, that the school has taken on board the learning from them and continues to improve. Very much, actually, in the same way that as we work with our schools which are in statutory categories and are quite interventionalist in terms of the support and challenge we bring, that we very carefully withdraw local authority support to allow a school to stand on its own 2 feet. So I just wanted to make that comment because it's important that you know that we know there's no such thing as a silver bullet and it needs to have a much longer term focus. Thanks.
Thank you. And Sarah?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on Richard's previous point about support in individual schools and just highlight the one aspect of the report around the reduction in the days excluded during this autumn term. I think it shows the impact of the interventions and strategies in individual schools by the fact that there's over a 50% reduction in the number of days excluded in this autumn term compared with last autumn term. And I have had a quick look at the spring term to date, and that trend is continuing.
Oh, that's useful to know, Sarah. Thank you. Councillor Jeff. You with us, Jeff? Kept you waiting for some time now. Side of your microphone. Okay, we'll move to Councillor Lucy. I'll come back to you, Councillor Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. It was just about a bit more information. So it would be interesting to have a breakdown of the exclusions into year groups and the type of schools that they're occurring in, whether it's, predominantly primary, secondary, through schools, or whether there's any variation in that. But also a bit more information about the reason for the exclusions. That would perhaps be helpful. And I think it would be really useful to see an analysis of the correlation between the attendance and attainment. If for no other reason, because if you could actually say to pupils, look, we've got this data which demonstrates that if you miss this number of days of school, you're much less likely to achieve this GCSE result, or however you can demonstrate it. I think it would be something that would be useful to have.
That's an interesting point, Lucy. Yeah. We're going to Sarah first.
In respect to Councillor Lucy's first point, the breakdown of the exclusions data, we absolutely do have that. However, there's a note of caution where some of the categories have very few numbers. It would be difficult to share because it can identify an individual. So perhaps just some consideration about how we could bring that forward.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I understand that.
Well, I think Judith's coming in on your latter points. Go on.
Yes, dear. Councillor Lucy, that impact on attainment is something that goes out in our letters, our communication to schools, and which schools send out to parents as well. So it does give a high level indication to all parents about the impact of non-attendance on attainment, quite clearly in the correspondence we've shared with schools to give to our families and pupils.
Okay, thanks, Judith. No longer having any kids in school, I missed that information.
Thank you. Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, I'm just picking up on the point Sarah's just made, Chair. I'm just sat here looking at 7.2 and 7.3 of the report and asking myself what happened at Easter last year, because there's a dramatic change in the level of exclusions between the spring term 24-25 and the summer term 24-25, both in the number of exclusion, but also, I assume, in the average length of the exclusions. And I'm just wondering, is there a change in strategy from that date?
Sarah.
Well, Karen explained earlier that, you know, for example, we're putting in place the behaviour working group. I think that was a little bit early, but when you look at trends generally across the academic year, the number of exclusions does taper as you move into the summer term. Also, we've got to remember the positioning of Easter, because that can skew the data somewhat. So we can end up with a very small April in terms of school days in some years, and other times it can be a completely full one.
Yeah, I fully understand that. But if you look at the summer term performance compared to the previous 3 years, it's a significant drop. So the change appears to have started from Easter.
Absolutely, and there has been an increased focus when working with schools, whether it's on an individual basis or, as Karen had noted, that team around the school basis, around exclusions and behaviour. And it would be seeing the benefits of that behaviour consultation panel that Karen referenced as well, which has been in place for about a year now.
Okay. Because I've just done some quick modeling. It looks as though if you take year on year, Easter to Easter, most likely the total days exclusion is going to be at or around 1,000, which is a significant drop from the previous year.
Absolutely.
Okay, have we exhausted questions? Okay, we'll move on then. Thank you there for that agenda item. So that takes us to item 7 on your agenda, which is recommendations in relation to the previous paper. 2 or 3 poignant points there, which we can develop. Anybody giving some recommendations?
Yes.
Just that request from me for additional information, please, Grandpa.
Okay. Additional information for further clarity, Angela?
Yeah, so we didn't really talk about the integrated business plan, which is now 6 months old. So whether we've got some evidence to say the actions in it are working, where we are working along that.
You're right, we didn't speak about the IBR, but we did speak about evidence and
Yeah.
So yeah, we can request that. Councillor Gareth?
Yeah, I think it's the same point I made previously about the some further information at some time about the high level of ALN pupils being excluded.
Yeah.
You know, just to have an understanding of that and what strategies that Judith and Karen are trying to use to actually try and maintain that.
Yeah, the one that stands out to me also is early intervention.
Yeah, 100%.
Lucy, you coming back as well?
Yeah, and the work on the gender disparity.
Okay.
And
vulnerable
Chair, then
vulnerable groups, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Lucy mentioned transition, and I think that comes with that early intervention, isn't it? Making sure from early years into school, transition into school, onto high school, tracking those pupils that I mentioned earlier that have been highlighted in primary school, and perhaps as they go on are vulnerable to behavioural or other issues. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything? Go on, Gareth.
Yeah, and I perhaps a little bit more information around the size of the schools where pupils are being excluded from. So, you know, are the exclusions from the larger, in the split between primary and secondary, and then perhaps analysis over the size of the schools? Are smaller schools excluding less on a percentage basis than larger primary schools, for example? Also, Welsh medium, English medium, you know. My perception is that Welsh mediums tend to have smaller group sizes, especially in the secondary sector, and just see if there is any correlation between that.
I'll have a think about that one because we didn't really discuss it in the meeting.
No, I know we didn't.
Yeah, no, but we'll consider whether we can word something around that. Angela?
Yeah, just thinking on what Gareth said there, but I would have some concerns there. It wouldn't necessarily just be the size of the school. Would it not be the socio-economic sort of, you know?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you'd qualify that, but yeah.
Okay. Anything in relation to behaviour support capacity? Should we put something in surrounding that? We discussed it, and
yeah, well, we did say in the previous one if we could have a sort of deep dive into that behaviour working group. So whether that could be linked with this paper as well, because.
Okay. Anything else? Just thinking about, we spoke about the behaviour programs and things like that. Do we need to put something out? Dr. Richard answered it and said it was being streamlined. Do we put something in relation to that? Well,
that was my previous comment, Chair. The behaviour working group is the group now set up to deal with that. So, yeah, more.
Yep. No, that's fine. We'll try and develop that a little bit further. Anything further? Good. Item 8 on the agenda is Cabinet responses to scrutiny recommendations. If you open the document, you'll see that most of our recommendations were accepted, and I think there was one which was partially accepted without opening the document. Anything further to say on that? In the work program meeting, we did have a conversation in relation to tracking our recommendations, and I think that would be a useful exercise. So that may be something which will come before us in the future. So anything on that one, Cabinet responses to scrutiny recommendations?
I think, Chair, the recommendations are tracked in the self-evaluation report, aren't they? But that's
they are, but we were thinking actions from them recommendations.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Just square the circle as it was. Okay, if there's nothing further to be said on that, we'll move on to item 9 on the agenda, which is our work program. It's detailed there for you, and it takes us through until 8th of September. We've populated it a little bit more than it was before. Any comments, inclusions, or removals that you'd like to see?
So there's
Councillor Garth.
Yeah, is there one plan there for the pre-election period or not? There's one under the number 5. Sorry, so May the 12th, isn't it? We should have to, sorry.
It's after Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, sorry, I read that as the 5th of May, sorry. But yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think we've taken that into consideration when we've been doing it, so I think we're pretty clear on that.
Yeah, can I just for correction, Chair, on that one for the May the 12th, it's not the Prestine catchment area, it's the John Beddoes catchment area. I think that's what it's always been called. In terms of the Prestine catchment area review, I would have thought it'd be the John Beddoes catchment area review.
I was just told Councillor Gareth Prestine catchment review, so that's how it's gone down.
Yeah, I know, but
how the paper comes out, that's how it will be framed on the agenda.
Okay.
Yeah, any other further comments on that? No, this brings us to the end of the meeting, and probably going to embarrass one of the people in the meeting now, and take the opportunity to thank IRIG for attending our scrutiny meetings. I believe this is IRIG's last scrutiny committee because he's going to sunny climates in Blaenau Gwent, but I would just like to take the opportunity from a scrutiny point of view to thank you, IRIG. I've been on scrutiny a long time, and I think you've been on there as an officer for just as long, really, and I really do thank your contribution to scrutiny. It's always been honest. It's always been, you've never hidden away, and your answers have always been acceptable and things. So, IRIG, I wish you all the best in the future, but really do thank you for your contribution to scrutiny. It's Blaenau Gwent's gain. It really, really is, and I really do mean that. So thank you, IRIG, and wish you well. So
thank you, Councillor Gwynfor. Thank you very much, and thank you. Yeah, 25 years of working in Powys County Council. You know, I had 13 years as a head teacher, are now 12 years now working in school improvement, and I can just say that Powys is very close to my heart, and I've enjoyed the time that I've been here. So thank you very much for that. It's very kind of you.
Well done, Eirik. Thank you. Diolch. Members, that brings the meeting to an end. Thank you very, very much for your contribution today. An awful, very detailed paper, and I think we've done a reasonable job on it. So hopefully we can come up with some good recommendations, which will help education in Powys and pupils attain what they wish to attain. So great. Thank you very much, all. Have a great weekend.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.